good afternoon to all the 32 people in the webinar and counting. My name is Janissa, and I'm chair of the PRCA Sustainability Working Group. Thank you for joining us for this event. We're really excited about it. This has been something that we've been working on hard over the past year or so. I'm just going to start with a quick introduction to the PRCA. If you're here in this event, you probably already know, but again, I'm going to just say that the PRCA is the world's largest professional PR body with a presence around the world, including in APAC. And the purpose of PRCA is to raise standards in PR and communications. For the Sustainability Working Group, we are one of the few working groups under PRCA Asia Pacific. We are a volunteer-led group consisting of professionals from the industry across the region. We were formed in recognition of the importance of sustainability and communications and the need to grow industry awareness and capabilities in this area. And about a year ago, if you can join me, just 12 months ago, I remember being in a really similar event with PRC where we first talked about, more brands and more businesses talking about sustainability. Even then, we were already talking about the need for the industry to close this gap in knowledge between, what brands needed to communicate and how much we in industry can support this process. Now, 12 months later, actually, the stakes have increased. We are hearing about investors wanting businesses to build in ESG criteria into their business models, consumers to open their wallets for products and brands that have some sort of sustainability claim or certification. And increasingly, as we're seeing in many jurisdictions around the world, regulators are also expecting companies to provide transparency about how they're accounting for certain climate or nature risks in their reports. So what all this means for brands and businesses that we work in or that we represent are that these brands and businesses are under increased pressure, more so than ever, to account for what they're doing on sustainability. Communications can either hurt or help this process. Every single person that I've spoken to, whether in an NGO, whether in an activist, an academic, or a business representative, all have told me that, it's really, communications is so important. We need communications to reach the people that we want to reach, to encourage the behavior that we need to get to our goals and to get people aware about the issues that they need to act on. At the same time, there's been so much confusion and even, growing accusations of greenwashing across in our industry as well. So it is really timely that here today, we're going to be talking about a set of guidelines that the PRCA Sustainability Working Group have been working on that aims to support and empower industry professionals like you and me, both in-house and in agencies, to communicate about sustainability in a powerful way, an impactful way, and of course, authentically as well. So right now, I'm just going to hand it over to somebody who has been really integral to this process of working on the guidelines. That's Marta Biggio, who's co-chair of the Sustainability Working Group. We'll take you through the process of putting together these guidelines and what they actually are. Over to Marta, please.
Thank you so much, Janissa, for the great introduction and for the great context. I am sharing a presentation now. Hopefully you all can see it. As Janissa mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the PRCA Sustainability Group. And I'm going to spend roughly the next 10 minutes talking about the context of these guidelines and the process that we went through to create these guidelines. And importantly, also, I'll touch base on the principles that are included in these guidelines. So as Janissa, oops, I can't share my screen. Oh, it's moving. So as Janissa mentioned, the process started roughly a year ago. We had a white canvas in front of us. We knew that it was important, but we didn't really know where to start. So we went through the drafting phase, and the drafting phase, what we did was we consulted industry benchmarks, we went to the legislative frameworks, we consulted best practices across the industry, and some of the examples of the sources we used are on the right side of your screen. Now, notably, you'll see that advertising is quite prevalent in a lot of these sources, but we also considered important that, as part of the marketing mix, advertising was important for us to draw a lot of conclusions that we could use also from a public relation practices. I think in general, advertising is quite well covered in this space, but PR is very nascent. So we need to make this bridge between the advertising regulation and the advertising guidelines and the PR guidelines to talk about sustainability. The second important phase of the process was the consultation process or phase. So we had now the set of guidelines pretty much done. We could have gone and put them out there, but we thought that that wasn't enough. We wanted to stress test these guidelines, and we wanted to make sure that they were relevant not only for communication professionals, but for NGOs, for industry bodies, and for communication agencies and thought leaders at large. So we went ahead and we consulted with a group of experts that you have on your screen. Two of them are with you today, Pamela and Robbins. Natalie and Siren were also part of the process, and equally organizations and NGOs in this space. We were lucky enough to have Klein Earth, Advertising Standards Authority of Singapore, and Clombs Declare, as well as Red Hill and Spurwing, chiming in and give feedback on these guidelines. Now, some words on the context, right? And I chose to call this section the confused consumer. I think we've all heard about this expression, the green gap, right? And the green gap is very much the gap between what consumers say they're going to do and what consumers end up doing. And it's a frustrating paradox, and that really remains at the heart of green business and hinders the development of sustainable products and services. And it's a particular phenomenon here in Asia. We are, as you're probably familiar, expected to account for 60% of global growth by 2030. We'll be home to a huge portion of the middle class in the future. So it's really on this side of the world that this gap needs to be addressed. So the priority and the focus to address this gap needs to happen. Now, as communication professionals, we have really a responsibility, I believe, to put all our storytelling power and our storytelling knowledge to bring this gap. And when you think about green gap, very often, you think that this is not a comms thing. This is probably a problem related to price. And it's true that price plays a role. 60% of the reasons why people say they don't buy sustainable products is indeed price. But 85% of the rest of the reasons have nothing to do with price and arguably are part of the rest of the marketing mix. So we have an opportunity specifically as communication professionals to address 21% of that, which is really linked to lack of information, 15%, and people not trusting brand claims. So out of, again, a huge focus on price, very relevant, but there's indeed a sweet spot for us as communication professionals to emerge and really tackle and bridge this gap that I described before. Now let's focus a little bit more on not trusting brand claims. And this slide was almost not needed. We all know that greenwashing is unfortunately out there, and it's hindering consumer trust in sustainable solutions and is a significant reputation and compliance risk for companies. As communication professionals and ultimate guardians of a company's reputation, it's probably one of the worst things that can happen to us, right? Is to be involved or not be able to prevent an episode of greenwashing, castle our clients in a wrong way, or our executives inside the organization in the wrong way. So we, above all people, are not interested in having this happening. And again, have a huge role to play in tackling this. So by understanding what we need to avoid, we can be better at communicating what matters. And that's hopefully what we will achieve, or we want to achieve, with these principles. And I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of the principles. They are only 5. And believe me, the list was long. I think we started with 10. And some of the feedback that we received was, this is too long, it's too complicated, people were not going to get it. So we reduced the list and we tried to make it comprehensive in a sense, so we could absorb different sets of examples and still be relevant. Principle number 1 speaks to the fact that claims need to be science-backed and substantiated. Very often we see, companies or organizations out there making claims without the relevant substantiation. We as communication professionals come in and ask the question before the statement is done, right? So we do have a role to play in ask before we put a certain statement in a press release, or before we put a certain statement in a speech for one of our stakeholders. Back it up, ask the right questions, dig a bit deeper and try to understand what was the exercise that was done for a certain claim to be out there. Principle number 2 is about being specific about terminology. And, sustainability is a technical discipline, so there's a lot of jargon used, net zero, carbon neutral, recyclable, biodegradable. These things are always used quite often in communication, but they do mean different things, and they're very often used and mixed and interchangeable. these things need to be accurate, and we need to, as communication professionals, ensure that that accuracy is there. The third principle speaks to considering the context of the claim. And sometimes you have organizations, that do amazing in a certain part of their supply chain or a certain part of their organization. And then, there's the temptation to do a blanket statement with that positive outcome. Be careful. It's great that we communicate progress, and it's great that we communicate that things are moving forward, but let's be specific about where and when they happen and to what part of the organization they refer. The fourth principle is about incremental impact. It's about not leveraging certain aspects that we have been already, that are good and that have been already present in our business. Let's not leverage them and make them new. For example, if you are a jean brand and you are using 35% of organic cotton in a certain line of jeans, which is great. You should communicate that 35%. But what you can't do is launch a new line exactly with the same amount of organic cotton and call it new, right? So let's be specific and concrete about that. And the fifth principle is probably my favorite. It's about communicating with transparency, and it's about in a certain aspect being transparent about the progress that we all need to do as entities and as organizations. It's, I think, okay not to have everything figured out. It's okay to a certain extent to share that level of transparency in order to be able to rally other folks, other peers inside the industry, and really tackle the collective problems, because many of these problems are complex and require collective action and industry alignment for them to really be solved. So that's really it from my side. Just a word that these guidelines are available on the PRCA website, and they are, hopefully a start. We would love to get your feedback. They only work if you give us feedback. The worst thing for us is to be, spending time on something that then is not relevant or is not used. So please do write to us, do give us feedback because we need you. So let me stop sharing my screen here, and over to you, Janissa.
Thank you so much, Martha. And I see that there are also questions that have come in the Q&A. So to everybody that if you were just listening and you have questions, feel free to pop it into the Q&A box. You see the button at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to these questions towards the end of the hour. I already see some coming in, and if you can have a copy of the recording, I'll let PRCA kind of answer that directly as well. So right now, I would love to introduce our panelists. We have put together people that we know that have been in the area of sustainability and communications, or both, for a while now. And you guys on the screen have helped us with this process, supported us with the consultation, or even shared knowledge over the past year and more. So I'm really happy to do a quick introduction, starting with Robin Hicks, Deputy Editor of Eco Business, and Kavik Kumar, Asia Pacific Sustainability and Policy Lead at Microsoft. Susie Golding, Head of Sustainability for APAC, Middle East and Africa at the MSL Group. And finally, Pamela, who is co-founder of Tinkat, a Singapore-based consultancy that works with businesses on their climate action strategies. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this panel. I'm just going to dive right in. Robin and Pamela, the both of you helped us and consulted with us on pulling together these guidelines. I just wanted to hear from you. What was there one thing that you felt really needed to be addressed, and what was it and why? Perhaps you can just start with Pamela.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think firstly, thanks a lot for putting this panel together, and really a good platform for us to actually to collaborate on these guidelines together. So that was a really good experience. I'm glad that now we have the guidelines out. We actually really good attendance as well to actually hear more about this. It shows that everyone is looking at this and how they can communicate better. I think one thing for me in terms of like contributing inputs for this communication guideline was really how we can demonstrate incremental impact. I think Martha has already alluded to it, right? If you're launching something that is already existing, that's not going to be contributing any incremental impact when it comes to mitigating climate change. So I think being able to demonstrate what's the incremental impact of a new initiative or supposedly green product, I think that's very important, because it's really when it's able to demonstrate the incremental impact of how it helps to mitigate climate change where it really counts in the whole climate fight. Yeah, so without that justification or without that knowledge and without that acknowledgement, right, whether something is indeed being able to contribute incremental impact, we may not be honest with ourselves whether the product is really truly green or greenwashing. Yeah. Robin.
Thanks, Pamela. If you just give me 1 minute, let me pull up a copy of the guidelines on my screen right now, so that everybody can see all 5 guidelines at a go. And actually what this is a copy of the sustainability guidelines that's available on the PRCA website for download. I'm going to be putting the link into the chat shortly. So yeah, so you should be able to see all the 5 guidelines in front of you, and the rest of the documents. And I'm going to scroll through really quickly for everybody. You will see that we explain the guidelines in a lot more detail, just like Martha has, and provided some examples of best practices as well. So over to Robin. I remember you gave me, you had some strong opinions and comments when we first put the guidelines together. What were they, and what do you think really matters that PR professionals should be implementing?
Yes, I've been tracking this, the development of these guidelines for quite some time. As you know, I've been pestering you about them. Really keen to see what comes of it. I'm impressed by all of them. To be honest, I think all 5 principles should be sort of instinctive to most people doing communications of any kind. I mean, some of them are fairly obvious, I'd say. And I think what's critical for these guidelines is that PR professionals use them to convince their clients not to greenwash. Now, it sounds obvious, but I think I was talking to Pamela about this as well. This is a comment that I think you made, actually, Pamela, is the ability of PR people, especially in Asia, to push back against their clients when they know that they're going to be greenwashing, right? And I think these guidelines are a really important tool for PR people to push back, to present their clients and say, look, these are the principles that we should be deploying. And by the way, have you heard of something called greenwashing risk? And if we proceed with the communication strategy based on the product that you've designed, we could actually land ourselves in a lot of reputational hot water. I think, especially just looking at the Singapore market, for example, I think it's extremely prone to greenwashing for a number of reasons. It's extremely pro-business environment. NGOs are extremely weak, disenfranchised. I think picking on the mainstream media too much, but it's a fairly compliant media. We had a session at Eco Business where we did some training for journalists around sustainability communications, and we did a presentation, a session on greenwashing. And someone from a mainstream media organization came up to me afterwards and said, look, this session on greenwashing is just irrelevant for me because we're just not able to push back or cover greenwashing. We cannot. It's not in our power, frankly, to call out, say, a government-linked company. We just don't feel that we're able to. So I think these guidelines are extremely important to empower PR professionals to at least give them something to, as I said, push back against clients who intend to greenwash.
Thanks, Robin. Actually, back to Pamela. You have worked with some PR agencies on some greenwashing or communications training. Is this something that you've noticed from agencies or PR professionals that they don't know how to push back? Or do you think we are empowered to tell clients or brands, don't say this because it's not accurate?
Yeah, I would say as what Robin highlighted, there are risks associated with greenwashing. I think that's definitely part of the prerogative, right, of an agency to actually not put themselves at such risk, because it not just compromises your agency's reputation, it also compromises how your product actually lands with your audience. So I would say, like, if you're looking at the product very frankly, it will be useful to really have a chat with your client, although I do recognize sometimes that it's usually after the product has been created that you're engaged, for example. But let's say if there's a long-term opportunity for you to also know that their upcoming products are going to be down the chain, it will be useful to use these guidelines to actually guide, to share with your clients, to actually share, like, hey, these are actually the guidelines available. I think when we're developing or innovating a new product, it's good it's good to like work with the end in mind to see how this message will land in the end. And I think calling out the risk is really important, because as much as we can see like companies may want to challenge themselves to do better and also to be more accountable to the climate, but let's say if the product that they're innovating really doesn't hit the mark and we're not able to communicate a good message around it, all that could actually be wasted effort as well. Yeah, so I would say like it is important to highlight that. I think in my own experience as well, sometimes there could be certain initiatives I feel may not be very aligned with the guidelines that we have put up as well. So I think that's where we have to like kind of gently pull us back to where what we are being accountable for when we are pushing certain things out. I would say that maybe for some products it's very clear, maybe you're trying to, I don't know, maybe if you are selling paint, you're just trying to have as many colors as you can, correct? So that is very clear cut in terms of your product proposition. But let's say if your value proposition actually surrounds around like the climate positive impacts of the product, then that actually has to be very genuine, and you also have to be able to back it up in terms of performance as well. Yeah, so I'll say like without compromising a good product, it also has to be able to have authentic climate benefits as well.
Thanks, Pamela. Actually, I thought you brought up a very interesting point about how industry professionals can potentially use these guidelines, not after something is created, but even before for that, and using brands to engage. So I think this leads to, I think this is a question for the PR professionals in this panel, for Susie and Kavik Kumar. How do you think these guidelines can be used and implemented by professionals? Let's start with you, Susie.
Thanks, Janissa. And first, can I say that I think these principles are great. I think they're much needed and will be a really useful resource both on the agency side and on the in-house side with communications teams. I think that they're really great for PR teams in terms of sort of setting the standard of what you should be looking at and what you should be aware of. I think they also need to be accompanied by a team really being helped to understand what greenwashing is and the severity of it, because it's not just the risk to the reputation of the client and the agency, but it's also the negative ripple effect that you get from greenwashing, that resonates in society and in communities in which we live, right? That if that trust is eroded at a brand level and then is put out in consumer comms, then that erosion of trust means that consumers don't know what to believe when claims are put out there. And I do think sustainability has an image problem with a lot of people, and the more that we can do to make sure that what we're putting out there is true and real and transparent while still inspiring change or progressing change is really important. So I think teams need to understand the repercussions of greenwashing and how severe it can be. But then they also need to know where to go to find the right information, right? And I find that's what's lacking with a lot of certainly our teams, and what we're working really hard at Publicis to do is to do the homework. So in the same way that you would for any sort of corporate comms campaign, dig deeper into the company, read the sustainability report, look to see what you think is missing, and ask the questions. And going back to Robin's point around, the agency client dynamic, here in Asia, we do tend to be a little less forceful when we need more information from a client. Certainly, if a client is dealing with a junior member of the team, that junior member is not going to feel empowered to challenge back and say, look, I need more information on what you're claiming here. So we do need to find some way to instill bravery in our agency teams particularly. And I think bravery comes through confidence, right? So if you're confident in around the questions that you're asking of a client, then that's going to sort of spur you on. So getting that sort of fundamental level of knowledge that underpins these principles is really important.
Thanks so much, Susie. That was great. And I really liked how you talked about, the practical ways that somebody, even a junior member of a team, can use these guidelines. Kavik, I was just wondering whether, from an in-house perspective, are there similar challenges or maybe different challenges that somebody would face in using these guidelines?
Yeah, thanks, Janessa. And absolutely. I mean, I think these guidelines are highly welcome. I think for in-house professionals as well, many times you are at a loss on what to look out for or what are the resources you can tap on. But as what Susie alluded to, I think this sets the tone within the organization and sets the precedence to basically show that this will set the baseline or foundation for anything that we communicate. So it helps to build capacity, it helps to scale it across the organization, despite rank and file. I think that helps a lot. And it also sets the tone for further conversations, right? This is just the start of the narrative, right? And as one of the things I wanted to call out is that it's also highly contextualized for the Asia Pacific, right? So I think it's been some time we have that sort of resource for the region, so it's going to be really useful. The other point I wanted to hit on is the social contract, right, with the stakeholders, right? When you communicate something, you want to build on that social contract and you want to take it to the next level, right? So I think that's going to be important, and this will again pave the way for that, right? So there will be more to this, hopefully, and especially with the legislation coming in fast and furious. We see that happening in some parts of the world. South Korea already has a draft bill on green creams and greenwashing, and we'll see that happen more across the board. So for corporates and in-house, this potentially poses some sort of reputational risk, right? If you're not going to communicate transparently and with balance, that's a huge risk for business. So this is, in our eyes, a tool to de-risk ourselves from false claims and credentials that we put on our products and services. So definitely very welcome. And I guess this will only help to create more capacity within the ecosystem and community moving forward.
Thanks a lot. Actually, it's really interesting how the both of you, Kavik and Susie, just talked about risks from different perspectives, whether it's for a brand reputational perspective or, even for the whole industry. And actually, there have been instances if like one brand greenwashes within an industry, actually it smears other brands and other companies throughout the entire industry as well. And actually, what was really interesting to me, if you open the Financial Times today, there is a headline rating the ESG raters. And we are hearing about regulators wanting to, for more transparency and scrutiny to the very agencies that are, giving ESG ratings to businesses. So actually a general question for everybody on the panel. Do you see the same kind of scrutiny coming to the PR agency? We don't have ratings just like rating agencies, but what we do is we do make claims on behalf of brands and clients. Do you see that? Do you think that we are going to face the same scrutiny? Is it coming to us, or is it a completely different ballgame? Anybody feel free to just jump in. Robin?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're seeing it already. There's a brilliant stunt at Cannes. I'm not sure you guys saw, where the CEO of Edelman was pursued around by some activists with a big sign next to him that read, this guy still works for fossil fuels. I mean, Edelman aren't the only ones, obviously. I mean, I think it's very hard for a lot of agencies, especially in tight economic times, to refuse any sort of client. And I would add also that it's a risk not just to PR firms, but also journalists. I was called out, I think I mentioned this to you, Jan, I was called out for greenwashing myself a few weeks ago for a story that we did, and to be honest, I found it very helpful. And I think some brands shouldn't necessarily see being called out for greenwash as a negative. It can really help you raise your game. Because the reason I was called out for greenwashing is basically not digging enough into a company that I'd covered, and someone that used to work for this company said that hadn't done enough due diligence and investigative reporting into this company, and it really woke me up to that. So I don't think it's always a negative being called out for greenwashing, even for PR firms when their reputation is at risk.
Yeah, I agree with Robin. I don't think it's always negative. I think there is lessons to be learned, because I do think that with a lot of brands and a lot of agencies working for them, the greenwashing is not advertent, it's inadvertent, and it's quite often due to a lack of awareness and understanding around sustainability, sometimes on both sides. So it's sort of the blind leading the blind. Sometimes it's a breakdown in communication on the client side between, say, marketing and comms teams and the sustainability teams. They're still quite siloed in a lot of organizations. And that's when mistakes happen, right? And so, it's very right that we should be held to account and called out. And it's under those circumstances where it does, then give us the the opportunity to think, right, how did we do this? How did this happen? What did we do wrong? And what do we need to put right the next time that we're doing, putting out a piece of content or a piece of communications around something that we're doing on the sustainability front?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add that I guess there will be, I guess, more scrutiny, right, as the general population gets more aware about what climate change means, and as well as the risk of greenwashing. I think it's not to say like, that should not discourage like any company or any agency from pursuing good work or from trying to still communicate well about climate initiatives. I think we cannot discourage that, because I think as we see policies picking up to actually enforce climate action when it comes to businesses, I think that's where we see the need for I think that's where I see it going hand in hand with good communication, because I think what we don't want is people to take a huge step back and be like, I'm just gonna shy away from talking about any green credentials. I think that's not the point, because this will definitely pick up as policies pick up on enforcement. But I think it's really an opportunity for us to really align and improve our capabilities to actually communicate about climate initiatives, instead of like shying away from like actually practicing like this piece of communication. I will also add that I think collaboration within the community is quite important, because nobody knows 100% about sustainability, correct? There's so much knowledge out there, so many standards out there, so many researchers out there, still working on the science, still understanding the problem. It's a very wicked problem. There are many facets of it, not just the environmental impact, also the social impact that it comes with sustainability. So it's actually a very big problem, very broad problem, very wicked problem as well. And that's where I think it's important that agencies or even companies also form their own a little community of partners that they can rely on to actually get feedback on, so that they can actually have a little test bed right before the actual communications land. And if the communication lands well or does not land well, it's always good to be open to feedback, because ultimately we all know that no one has the silver bullet to solving climate change, and we still need to partner with these clients and brands to actually get us there. Yeah, so I think that's where we have to kind of be open with the communication channels and maybe explore even different ways, right? Because it's a bit of like co-creation, co-consultation, instead of having the absolute right and knowledge about launching this specific product, especially when climate change is involved. Yeah.
Yes, guys. Actually, I want to get into the details of this, because it's so interesting that we're saying that it's okay to call out one another for greenwashing or highlight this, and that even as a community to depend on. And I think a fear that a lot of increasingly number of professionals have is, I don't want to talk about what I'm doing because I don't want to get called out for it. So I want to hear from each of you. How have you been called out before, or what have you done to flag a certain inaccuracy to somebody? How can somebody literally sitting here do this? The next, minute they spot something, short of writing an article on eco-business for it, on that, right, Robin? But, what are the ways? What have you guys experienced? I would love to hear that.
Yeah, maybe I can start. I think it's always starts with having a strong moral compass, and I think you need to also be very open in receiving and providing criticism. I think that's very important, and I think you need to expect that from the same party as well, right? So in terms of that, many a times you also have the role in terms of building capacity and educating tactfully the stakeholder you're engaging with, right? And it all depends on mutually agreed outcomes eventually, and of course keeping the bigger picture in mind. I think that's very important. So I think it's okay to make mistakes, but mistakes need to be learned from and subsequently corrected accordingly, and that's how I see that. So I think it's as simple as that, but we all need to have an open mindset towards that. And as Pamela was alluding to, it's not everything that we know within our means, right? So we need to have that curiosity and gumption to continue learning as we go along in that journey. So yeah, that's definitely.
Thanks. Anyone else would like to respond or add on? Robin?
Just quickly, a term that I picked up, I think it's from Susie actually, perhaps a year or so ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, Susie. Corporate vulnerability, right? The ability of a company to be vulnerable about their sustainability commitments. To be honest, I haven't seen any company. I mean, you guys all saw the video of Apple visualizing its sustainability report. That was false modesty. It wasn't admitting that sustainability was difficult. It was basically, I guess, sort of good PR. But I think there's a huge space for companies to be genuinely honest that sustainability, again, it's a cliche, is a journey that isn't always going to be positive. I mean, the companies that we've covered recently that have only just recorded their emissions in Southeast Asia, for example, Grab, Gunung Rajapaksa, huge steel company, Swire Group in Hong Kong, all of their emissions have risen after they've written their first sustainability report year on year, all of them that I can remember. That's just a consequence of being in Asia and growing and having a fossil fuels based grid. I mean, that's just the reality. I think companies really need to get more comfortable with communicating the difficulty of sustainability. And I think it would be hugely disarming, and journalists like myself be far less critical if companies were actually honest about how difficult sustainability is and realize that the road won't be perfect. But yeah, as I said, I haven't seen any company that's been honest, at least in its communications, its public consumer facing PR about how difficult sustainability is. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah.
I agree, actually, and I would love to see more humility from brands, because it's always changing. Everyone's learning. Everyone makes mistakes, and how powerful for a leading brand in a certain sector to say, well, we started off down this path, it hasn't worked out quite how we thought it would for these reasons, we're going to look at it again and start again. There's an immensely powerful message in that for other brands in that sector and also outside of that sector, because people are going to make mistakes, and particularly if you are a huge company, you're trying to retrofit sustainability into ways of working that you've done for a very long time. And that's just looking at the internal challenges. That's not even taking into consideration the external impacts that might, affect your ability to make progress in some of the areas that you focused on. So, it would be really nice to see that. Whether we'll ever see that, really, I don't know. But yeah, I would like to. And, I would like to think that, again, agencies should be brave enough to encourage their clients to adopt that stance and not try to hide something. Or even, I've seen in sustainability reports where, okay, it's not it's visible, but it's not visible because, reports get done and they sit on a website and not many people look at them. But even in sustainability reports, it's very rare that you see a narrative that talks about things that went wrong and how they were put right. So if you haven't got the confidence to even do it in your sustainability report, you're never going to have the confidence to do it on a much more visible platform. But I would like to see more of that for sure.
Thanks, Robin and Susie. Corporate vulnerability is something to think about. I think at this point, I want to get to the Q&As. We do have a few questions that are already there that I think can follow up from what you just discussed. Actually, this is to, I think, maybe Kavik and Susie. How can companies incorporate these principles within sustainability reporting? Just because you're talking about it, Susie.
Well, I can count on one hand the number of sustainability reports I've read where I've thought, yes, I know exactly what you're trying to do here, and I can see your roadmap, and I know sort of what you're trying to achieve, and I know your baselines. Like, you just do not see that level of detail in the majority of sustainability reports. A lot of them are just full of fluff and waffle. So, yes, use these principles if you have responsibility for writing your company's sustainability report, or you're outsourcing it to an agency. Use these principles as guiding principles for writing that. I'm a great believer that a sustainability report from a communications perspective should be a great sort of piece of resource, for all sustainability comms. You should be able to go to the report and find really great narratives, really good, honest messaging, detail of data, detail of baselines. It should be your go-to document. But unfortunately, the majority that I see and read, they're just not there yet. You have to sort of really sort of dig through the mire to find anything that is even approaching, a good sort of transparent, honest narrative around what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, I think these guidelines would be really useful.
I was wondering whether you can speak to that as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I certainly think that the majority of sustainability reports today that are out there are very lopsided and unbalanced. So basically portraying very glorified versions of sustainability performance. And I think that has to change. And I think one of the biggest issues is the whole mental biasness and mental structures that we have around communications, which means when we put out these reports need to really shine when it goes out. So I think we need to break away from that stigma. Easier said than done, but I think this will pave the way forward for that stigma to eventually break and be leaving that inertia over time.
Thanks, Kavik. A few questions. So also there's a point in the comments about for Robin about the Lego's admission that they can't go ahead with plastic breaks after looking at the overall impact of of production. So could this be an example of corporate vulnerability?
Yeah. So Lego. Sorry. Yeah. When I saw that, initially I thought, to be honest, I did not believe it. Their response. I thought it was just because of the extremely low price of virgin plastic at the moment that they cannot afford recycled plastic, and that's the reason that they decided to U-turn on that commitment. I did not believe them at all. Again, that's just, I guess, being generally cynical of corporate communications. But yeah, no, I do think if true, that's a really good example of corporate vulnerability. Yeah, that's why they did not press on with using recycled materials in their bricks. But yeah, as I said, I'm not entirely convinced that that's the full picture, and I'd be inclined to suspect that it flouts one of the principles in your guidelines.
Thanks. Interestingly, there are also brands like big companies that come out to talk about some challenges in meeting, for example, Scope 3 emissions, talking about supply chains. There've been a lot of that as well. Isn't that corporate vulnerability? Pamela?
Yeah, I think well, I will have to be a bit cautious because I recently I was also at a I would say like a closed door discussion where we had a few entities who are representing business associations as well. I think, and also like corporates as well, right? So I think sometimes they may actually, I would say there is a bit of caution because sometimes they may be actually raising all these challenges to really want us to kind of like dumb down like the standards. So that could be possible if something is perceived to be so hard and not feasible for the industry to do, right? And then that may result in the standards being like dumbed down. So I think that's definitely not what we want. I would say like when I saw the Lego piece of news, I think one side was definitely like, is it more of a cost issue or was it a feasibility issue? But I also thought that at the same time, by them admitting, I mean, just purely from an environmental emission standpoint, right? I think by them not persisting in it because it actually generates more emissions than it than it would. I think that already shows that actually they're holding themselves accountable to what actually matters, which is climate emissions. I thought that in doing that, it also held other industry players accountable because if I'm using recycled plastic now, I would think that my stakeholders or my customers will be concerned that, hey, actually, am I actually helping climate change if recycled plastic is now reported to be more emission intensive, right, than virgin plastic? So that's one. But I think secondly, given that we are all accountable to actually reducing climate emissions, I think it still doesn't absolve them from the responsibility to find something better than virgin plastics. Yeah, so I would say that them taking one step back from recycled plastic but actually having to find an alternate solution to further reduce emissions from virgin plastics, I would say that if they're able to make that step and make that switch, I would say that overall they're still doing things, they're trying to do things right. But let's say if we observe and they don't actually, come off finding a better solution, right, then I think, that's pretty telltale that actually on the impact wise, they have actually not made any improvement at all. Yeah, so I would say that, I mean, from the onset, like, could they not have known that recycled plastic is more emission intensive than virgin plastic? I think that's one. And I think secondly as well, will they actually really innovate to actually find something better than virgin plastic? So I think this two has to add up before we can really kind of assess, right, whether Lego is really being authentic or sincere in their messaging and their innovation strategy.
Thanks a lot, Pamela. Actually, I want to use this to address another question in the Q&A, because Pamela, you have so much background and you understand, the process of plastic recycling, you understand carbon footprint. Not every PR professional listening in would. So there is a question here about how, there's so much environmental data, stats, reports. It can be very technical, complex, and overwhelming. So how can we communicate our messages and stories well, so that we don't fall into greenwashing, and yet it's effective enough to interest media and consumers? Anybody on the panel wants to take this? Yeah.
Pretty tough question. I'll just take a step at the consumer angle, right? So I think when I started, of course, trying to get traction for people to actually care that sustainability is something that we should do something about. I think when you speak to a normal individual, they'll be like, oh, it's going to be more expensive, or it's going to be more inconvenient. What's in it for me? So I think being able to address what's in it for me for the consumers is really important. And for me, I will usually try to communicate from a health point of view, and as well as from a cost point of view. So there are certain, like, I guess, initiatives, or rather products that are more that support the sustainable lifestyle, that could actually turn out to be more profitable for the individual in the long term, meaning that it actually saves them costs in the long term. Maybe they get a rebate when they use a reusable container. Maybe if they use a good piece of clothing for a longer time, it actually ends up saving them more money, right, than getting something from fast fashion, for example. And maybe it's also better for their health, right, if they're supporting something more natural as well. Yeah, so I would say, like, for the consumers, I think what I found work for the general mass consumers, right, because everybody cares about cost, everybody cares about health, more than everybody cares about the environment, for example. So I would say, like, messaging that comes with that talks about cost and health really helps consumers help to rationalize their decision making, as it's already part of their regular decision making. Because in their regular decision making, they won't be thinking like, okay, what's the climate impact, but they'll be thinking about the cost and health. So if we can actually demonstrate like how something that is better for the climate actually helps in their cost and health aspects as well, the take up could be actually greater from the consumer point of view as well for such products. Yeah.
Thanks, Pamela. Susie?
Yeah, I would just like to add to that, brands shouldn't feel compelled that they have to do a big campaign and amplify around every sustainability action that they're taking, right? I think it's really important that transparency is there, and whoever is interested in, checking out a claim that a brand makes can find the data and the detail that sits behind that. But I don't think that necessarily means that everything has to be pushed out, because, back to Pamela's point, consumers are interested in certain things and not interested in other things. And, like you would do with any bit of brand comms, like, who are they targeted at and what do they care about and what are they interested in? I think that's when you get the engagement between the consumer and the brand. We use a methodology called Swords and Shields, which is about helping brands identify, what are they doing on the sustainability front that is amazing, that is going above and beyond what's expected of them, where, they are leading in their sector, which also aligns with what the consumers of that brand care about. That's what they should go big on. They should see what they can develop around their marketing for that. Equally important are their shields, right? So the other stuff that they're doing, there still needs to be a very clear and transparent roadmap around that information. But that can sit on a website. It can sit in a report. It has to be easy for people to find. So you still need that depth of information there, but it's not necessarily also what you want to push out in a marketing campaign, right? So I think helping brands to differentiate between what is going to sort of push them forward in terms of consumer engagement around some sustainability issues, and what is important from a legislative perspective or from a corporate perspective, are not always the same. But the transparency has to sit across all of them.
And one more question, and I'm just going to move on to a few questions here about how do we bring sustainability into organizations? How do we train more sustainability communications professionals? There's a longer question in the box there, but about the lack of professionals with an understanding of the issues, or how do we ensure that sustainability isn't just tagged to one person's job, but it's integrated into the organization? I think Robin, Kavik, I see you guys nodding, so maybe you can take this.
Yeah, well, I think sustainability is everyone's responsibility within an organization, and I think what organizations can do is to help to change or turn that passion into tangible empowerment. I think that's going to be very important. And even in an organization like ours, we find a lot of people interested in the issue. They just don't have opportunities to, get their hands dirty and be involved in that aspect, right? And traditionally, sustainability and communications used to be two very distinct principles, right? But today, I think that has changed completely. I think the convergence is so strong, and typically we see a lopsidedness, right? So either someone's very strong on the sustainability technical aspect, or someone's very strong on the communications aspect. So we need to bridge that gap, and organizations need to facilitate that bridging through immersion programs, cross training, or collaborative efforts, and creating a bit of a decentralized approach towards learning and ideating of solutions. So communications teams have to start working very closely with technical teams who put out the overall sustainability performance or roadmaps of the organizations, and vice versa. So I think that's how we can build organic talent and organic capacity, and this has to happen at various levels of the organization.
Okay, this is very interesting because sorry, Robin, because you were just mentioning to me a year ago about how, sustainability and communications kind of need to be different functions, but at the same time, there's a lot of collaboration that's required. Robin?
Yeah, I just want to add to that because someone's put a question in the Q&A box about where sustainability should sit in the organization. It seems to be that initially a lot of companies are sort of lumping sustainability in a department almost temporarily, like when it's lumped in comms. The assumption is that that's how that company sees risk or opportunity. Sustainability is a communications opportunity, which I think raises a lot of suspicion, and rightly so. I think where sustainability sits, as long as that person, whoever's handling sustainability, has direct access to the decision maker, I think then sustainability has a chance of flourishing, or a company acting on those ambitions. One point that I did pick up at a conference, a Rethink conference in Hong Kong recently, was about people, the idea of double hatting. Say you handle sustainability and comms, or sustainability and public affairs, or whatever else, marketing or legal affairs, is a genuine risk of burnout, right? I think people who are passionate about sustainability in a company, and that's generally why a company takes it on, is someone puts their hands up and volunteers to be the sustainability officer, in addition to doing their original mandate, whatever that is, head of comms. I think we need to be careful that just because someone is passionate about sustainability, they shouldn't do that in addition to their job as well. That should be someone's job in and of itself, right? Sustainability, I think the progression of a company, it should start as its own entity within a company, and with direct link to the CEO, the decision maker. And then eventually, as it evolves, then everyone in different companies has responsibility for sustainability. So that's how it should generally evolve. But yeah, I think, I should just make that point about burnout of individuals taking on sustainability. We've got to watch out for that people are taking on too much just because they're passionate about it.
Yeah, sorry, I also like to add, I think, so I've been in organizations where, of course, sustainability is, or worked with organizations where sustainability is part under marketing or PR, because that's where they perceive the risk to be. Personally, I believe that sustainability should be where product innovation is, because that's actually where innovation can actually bring about the positive impact of sustainability. I think often if we were to park it to something in a more kind of front-facing or downstream function, right? That's when there's actually very limited space to actually improve on the sustainable footprint of a product. And let's say for most companies, they're either selling a service or a product. I think that's where sustainability really has to sit in either innovation or operations, because that's where the most change can happen. We really need to start designing products right on the onset when we're starting to design a product or thinking about product. That's where sustainability has to be on the table to be like, okay, these are the improvements that needs to be made, so that the impact can be felt when it's being pushed out as well. So I would say that the more upstream, or rather the more the closer to the ground or closer to the innovation phase that sustainability is being highlighted, or even sustainability is the one that's spearheading, right, such innovations, I think that's where the most impact can be achieved for the climate, rather than something more downstream functions, or maybe like one of, I'm not really sure to define, but maybe more front-facing functions as well. And I think there was a question in terms of like, how do I get information? How do I validate the information that I get? So I think I also get this issue as well, right? Starting out, there's really no community to really share data, share information, share news, share research as well. So just wanted to share, there is like a Telegram chat that we have with about 600 plus use or people or professionals, and we actually use that to share information as well regarding sustainability. We also use it to challenge information. We use that to actually verify information. I think most recently we have seen an influencer actually use the group to consult us in terms of what she should do with respect to a client. So just for context, right, influencer reach out on the group, some brand had actually reached out to actually promote, right, their carbon trading platform, for example. So without having more knowledge about the platform, she actually reached out to actually want to understand more about the topic. And a few of us actually reached out to share with her what actually matters when it comes to a carbon trading platform. In conclusion, she decided to drop the client, even though it could have been a good opportunity for her business-wise and her personal branding-wise. But I thought it was very wise that she actually sought counsel and then decided that, hey, maybe this is not very aligned with my strategy, or I don't really know what they're talking about. They don't really know what they are talking about. And I think that's always a good place to start if you even understand what they are doing in the first place. Yeah.
All right, sounds great. I think it goes back to your point about community. If you want to share the details of the group, just pop it into the chat. I want to go, since Martha is here, there are some questions about the guidelines that I think we can address. There was a concern like, does this apply only to products or services? Martha, maybe you can share that. And also, how do we measure incremental impact? If you can speak a little bit to that with the next minutes, that would be good.
Sure. I guess to the first point on services, it wasn't the intention. The intention was that the guidelines would be relevant for both products or any sort of communication professionals that are supporting product communication and service communication. I think maybe what we could do to improve in the future is the examples that we use on the guidelines. So if you go to the actual document, there's a section that has example, or actually each article or each principle has a set of examples. And it's indeed true that those examples are very product focused. So I think, yes, we need to do better maybe at giving some examples around services. And as to incremental value, it's really anything that is that is more than what was there before. So to my example on the cotton, if we're talking about 35% of cotton on jeans, we can't use the same value to go outside and do a full line of campaign or communicate a full line of jeans using exactly the same, right? So we need to make sure and ensure that whatever value that we are communicating is incremental versus the previous one. I guess that's it.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and actually it's all in the guidelines. It goes into a lot of more detail. You can download it. The link is in the webinar chat. I think final minutes to the panelists. One thing, just very quickly, one thing that a PR professional should do walking away from this seminar, one thing to remember from the past hour, what would it be? Susie.
I would say take away these guidelines and learn them by heart. And also the first step, looking at any brief or thinking of working with any client, is do your homework. So, have a look at the sustainability report. If you can't find what you're looking for in there, ask for everything else and be a little bit relentless. And I guess my biggest sort of takeaway would be question everything. You are the protector of integrity, if you like. So question everything if you can't find it.
Kavik?
Yeah, just building on Susie, I think it's okay to make admissions that you don't know everything. So having that humility to accept that and grow in your role is going to be crucial. So that's my takeaway.
Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, no, to the point earlier about corporate vulnerability, right? I mean, can you as a PR practitioner couch that as an opportunity? No company, no brand out there is doing that anywhere, as far as I can tell. Not Patagonia, not Unilever, not any of the sustainability pinups, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. So it's an opportunity to be honest, to admit that, as Rick said, is failure is part of sustainability. We're all of us, right? We're all learning as we go.
Martha, you wanted to respond to that?
Not respond, really, just to build on. And I totally agree. And I was sort of, because I was not officially on the panel, so I didn't want to jump in, but I've heard a lot on this point of corporate vulnerability. I couldn't agree more. Just to add also that I think that by being vulnerable, we can accelerate the response of the industry, if that makes sense, because a lot of the problems that these companies are answering, they won't be able to answer alone. So unless they come out and they show that vulnerability, you know, and give the opportunity for other companies to rally with them and to sort of join forces to solve these problems, then they will stay in their own corner, and then you know, these will be eternal problems. So I just wanted to add that I do agree.
Last word from Pamela. What is your one takeaway for PR professionals?
Yeah, I would say, like, don't be afraid to reach out to get information, and also to be part of a community. They can really be good counsels for you. As we have discussed, right, no one expects you to know 100%, and especially for something that's pretty new. I think that's where a community really comes in to help shed light, and also to encourage each other along the way as well, to share best practices. Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for your time. This was a great discussion. You know, it actually goes to show how much more nuanced the discussion or the conversations around the role of PR in sustainability communications has grown over the past year. I just want to thank you so much to the four panelists for your time and with everybody in the past hour. And I think most of all to acknowledge the support and effort of PRCA Asia Pacific in supporting the working group and the development of these guidelines. You can find more information online. We have the download link here, and PRCA will also be sharing them on their website. So keep a lookout, and have a great evening ahead. See you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.